Any other discussion on item number 7A or B?
I have a question for interim finance officer, Ms. Dana. Where do we stand on the required audit?
Right now, I am working with the current auditor. As you know, the previous auditor resigned pretty much right at year end, and so we were kind of left trying to find somebody, and when you're that close to year end, everybody already has their schedule set, so it was hard to find anybody, number one, that had availability, and number two, that actually does government audits. It's a field, unfortunately, that's been shrinking. So we did get an auditor, and we are working with them currently. We're working through some issues with the prior balances, trying to tie the prior balances into the prior audits. And as soon as we can work through that, we've been in communication with the current auditor and trying to get her records. And as soon as we do that, we can move forward with the audit.
Are we able to meet our required deadline?
The deadline passed October 31st, and unfortunately, the prior auditor had not submitted a termination of her contract to us until November. So the letter was just signed by Twig today. It was, I think, she dated it November 1st. And our prior auditor was legally not allowed to start our audit until she signed her letter saying she was not the auditor, and she had not done that yet. So when the new auditor submitted the contract that you approved and we signed, we sent it in, and they came back and said, well, somebody else is doing the audit. So she had to then backtrack and submit a resignation on the audit.
Months later.
Yes.
It's interesting that she resigned too, because I don't think any of us had any contact with that individual besides what we heard through the finance officer. During your time there, have you been able to find out anything? Was there any sort of push to maybe make her resign?
So a question on that, if you're saying you were notified by the previous finance director, you're saying that we were notified before November 1st. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, who are you asking that question to?
The person who's asking the question, you.
That's not what I asked. That's why I'm confused.
You said it was the previous finance director. Do you think they talked to the person who was supposed to be doing our audit? Because we had someone lined up to do the audit.
No, the question was
And
why
then they resigned.
That's not what the question was.
I'm sorry, please rephrase your question, or restate.
Yeah. No, I said, I don't, did you ever, the first thing I said was, did you ever find out why she resigned? I don't think any of us actually had any contact with her, besides what we heard here or through the finance officer. Did you find any reasons why? Was there a push to make her resign? I'm sorry, I'm asking Ms. Luther.
I'm trying to understand the question, and
Ms.
that's
Luther,
my
do
right.
you understand the question?
I
Why
guess
who
I do.
resigned?
Yeah. The auditor.
Okay. Well, she just said we didn't know that she had resigned.
No, we did know that she had resigned, but she had not submitted her resignation. That was the key.
So we were informed.
She had sent an email in saying she resigned, but she had not officially resigned. Her contract, it was supposed to be something signed by the two parties. And the state reminded her that she had not done that. So then she followed through with that. But there was an email, after some correspondence between her and the previous finance officer, she did resign. And that was the only notification we had of her resignation, other than the finance officer telling me she had resigned.
Now I have questions. So what was her reason for resignation, the auditor?
She stated various reasons, and
What was the official?
Can you tell us those reasons?
that's what we were trying to get to the bottom of. And
Well, could you just state the reasons that she stated?
well, she said various. That's all she
Oh,
said.
she said
Yeah,
various.
she said that was.
You're not saying various.
No,
She said various.
that was her. Those were her words. And then we wanted to know what those reasons were, because that's concerning when somebody does that, especially an auditor. And her response back to us was she altered the letter to say it didn't fit into her schedule. So that because that, you know, we would want to know, and the local government commission who approves our audit, they would definitely want to know. And so that's why the various reason explanation was not sufficient for our purposes.
And, you know, I asked us, was there a push maybe to make her resign? And from what I can gather, well, I guess I'll just ask this question, and this might be something that we have to table until Mr. Hoffman can look into it, is, was there really any, my question is, was there any inappropriate, perhaps, communications between the former administration and the auditor that might interfere with or push for the auditor not to continue her services here? So maybe, before you answer that question, that is a question of mine, maybe you can look into that with him, so if there is something that we're able to put out there, I think it would be good for us to be able to do that.
I would say rather than creating a cloud over the previous finance director, if you have information, share it.
Well, I don't want to violate anything statutory, so I know that some things are personnel records, and I don't know what the gray, there's a little bit of gray area there. So we should probably give that to Mr. Hoffman and see if we can put some of that stuff out there, if there is anything for us to put out there.
Back to my initial question, Ms. Luther, and based on some of your answers, missed deadlines and some backdating documentation from the auditor, are there any concerns of not being compliant?
In terms of us not being compliant, in terms of financial records
Financial
or
records?
or deadlines,
Both.
there may be some restatements, based on my discussions with the auditor, restatements of prior years to correct some items. I'm not sure if the state, I know there was a prior year adjustment that was recorded last year, and I'm not sure that the state even questioned it. And I'm not sure at this time that that was even an accurate prior year adjustment that the auditors made. So at the current time, there may be some restatement of prior audit reports to correct some errors.
And that's what the upcoming auditor will be.
Yes, he'll address those, because the auditor booked an entry that is quite confusing, and so and her reasons are, there's a lot that's being researched. So the auditor, he's looking into a lot of different things, and I am too, and so he'll be able to present a comprehensive report to you.
And the second part of that, the deadline, is there a
There's like an
stopgap deadline that we have to hit?
December 1 is usually like the unspoken grace period. Most municipalities, it's an October 31 date, but by 12/1, just as long as you have everything done, the state usually doesn't do anything about it. The intent is for us to have everything done unless we hit some more roadblocks. We're currently waiting for the prior auditor's calculations in order to see some of the adjustments that she has in her records.
The prior, if I could,
I'm sorry, I ask you a question. So with regard to these auditor who is making these adjustments, is it the auditor from last year?
Yes.
Is it the auditor
Well,
that resigned, or is it the new auditor?
The
Which
new-
auditor are we talking about making adjustments?
The new auditor is going to have to make adjustments to the prior auditor's report, so they're going to have to restate the
The
beginning
auditor
numbers.
that resigned, or the
Yes.
auditor prior to that who did last year's?
So the current auditor, which is the new auditor, is going to have to restate the prior auditor's audit report figures.
Which is which auditor?
The one that resigned,
The one that resigned?
yes.
Okay.
If
Well,
it's-
so as not to cast any shadows, let's just remember, we had 7 years of perfect office. And I don't think we can go without stating that. And if something happens that we have to consider or make a change, we'll certainly consider that when it comes before us.
Yes.
Any other questions on 7A or B?
yeah, I'm just going to follow up.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Back to the deadline, you said that you're waiting for the prior auditor to provide information. Is that prior auditor working with the town to expedite that information since we have a 12/1 deadline? Or is that we can't go any further until we get that information?
We've been in constant contact with her, and I know that the current auditor communicated with her on Monday, and he feels certain he'll get the information he needs. She has responded to my request for information. She didn't necessarily have answers for some of them, but when we get her work papers, we'll be able to look into it to figure out what the adjustments were and so forth. So we'll be working through that.
Okay.
And Ms. Luther, do you mind, or do you feel comfortable commenting on that perfect audit? If that, I mean, is that what a perfect audit actually is, and if that is truly reflective of what the town of Summerfield has had?
Is that reflective of what? I didn't hear you.
Of what the town of Summerfield has had?
I don't know if perfect is the term that you would want to use for an audit, because an audit is just pretty much a review of the financial records to make sure there aren't material misstatements. And so the auditors, based on your total revenue and expenses, they're looking at what's material, so that they come up with a number and they look at materiality. So an audit, unlike what the general public thinks of an audit, they think of an audit as an auditor going in and verifying everything and making sure there's no fraud and so forth. That's not the intent of an audit. And if you read the audit report, you'll look through there and it'll say that they're not reviewing it for that, and they make no comment as to that. So an audit is looking for material misstatements, they're looking for compliance, and they're just stating that you've materially represented the figures with or without their help, because a lot of times they'll help you do those journal entries, and which they did, and they have, and they then not comment on fraud or anything else.
Because they don't comment on fraud for these, right? So there is no...
If they discover it, then of course they're gonna do something about it, and then it's a compliant issue. But yeah, so an audit, you know, and this is just speaking of the general public. There's a misconception of the general public when they went with an audit, and it's been my entire career. They think an audit means that somebody's gone in and looked at everything, and they haven't.
And I noticed too that in the report, I think it's something like the internal controls that recommended that the governing body, which would be us, would maintain oversight. Maybe some other recommendations too. Did you, from what you saw, do you think that that has been kept up with in every way that it was recommended?
Well, with a small municipality, you're looking at smaller staff, and so you're not going to have the segregation of duties that you would have with a larger staff. That's just a given with a small municipality. And so you have to do whatever you can to mitigate those potential internal control issues. And you're going to have potential internal control issues with a small staff. And so that's why we have an internal control policy, and you're supposed to review it every couple of years to see where you can make adjustments and so forth. And that'll be something that TWIG will be looking at, especially with the new digital age. Everything's automated, and we have to make sure that we've kept up with the times. And our policy is kind of old, so it's time to probably update it for the digital age. So those are some of the things, and we need to get into the 21st century with our processes as well as our policies.
And did you find that our staff picked up with those policies?
So there are policies that we have that may not have been, say, followed, but I've seen communications that said, no, we're no longer using that. So
Difficult to...
what I'm thinking is that it just needs a general review, and Twig and I have spoken about that, general review of policies, looking at what ones do we want, what ones do we not want. Do we want to alter them? They're kind of old now. You know, some of them were when we were new as a town, you live and you learn. So especially with the fee schedules and the way we rent facilities. So those are things that we want to look at. Can we do this better? Can we mitigate those internal controls? And that's one of the things I've said for many years, either follow your policy or get rid of it or alter it. Don't have a policy in place that you're not following, and so that's what we need to look at. Are we following those? And if we're not, then either get rid of them or alter them.
Mr. Hampton, that just reminded me, you had asked something a few months ago about a recommendation, I think, that the auditor had.
And that's what we were talking about a little bit as far as just to maintain continuing governing board oversight. And so that's the thing that Ms. Luther and Twig can work on, to just to make sure that we have the policies up to date and can have that
Okay.
governing
So
oversight.
that's.
And just to give you one idea of one way we mitigate it, just as an example, I do not sign checks because I have too much control over the finances. So if I were to sign checks, that's giving me way too much opportunity to potentially commit fraud. So that's why you mitigate that risk of potential fraud by not allowing the finance officer to sign checks. So those are some of the things that we're talking about when we talk about mitigating risk and internal controls and segregation of duties.
Is that something you started lately?
No, that's
We were already doing that?
when I started here the first time, I made sure of that, because I knew that,
So
Being
did
a
our
foreman.
finance, did D Hall sign checks?
and that was one of the things I put in place when I first started, because I knew that having been a former auditor, the auditor would be glad that we were not doing those things. So, yeah.
Some folks get very defensive about these conversations, but I think they're wonderful to have so that we can understand them, people can understand them, and we can look to see if we can make things better.
Well, I'll be some of those people if that's what you're referring to, no problem. But let me be clear, D Hall had 7 years of perfect, correct, whatever you want to call them. The majority of those I sat and listened to because I was either on this council or sitting in the mayor's chair. They complimented how we separated our duties. They complimented how we did our signatures on approval, on checks. They complimented. They never reported anything remotely to do with the word fraud, never.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting that
And you can
anything.
call it perfect or you can call it correct. I sat here for every one of those. I listened to the person who came and did the presentation, and that's what I heard every time.
I'm not suggesting fraud, I'm just answering a question.
I feel like you are.
Ms. Luther-
I feel like you are.
Ms. Luther,
I have-
of course, obviously, when they recommend that we have the governing board oversight, as a person on the governing board coming in, I think it's my duty to look into it, to make sure that I continue to do what's recommended of me by the auditor.
Let me be
So
clear,
they-
let me be clear with this, because since, excuse me, let me be clear with this. From the day I walked in the door, it doesn't matter what I say or what I mean, it gets misreported in the media, it gets twisted on social media. So I'm answering a question about mitigation of risk and internal controls. I am not suggesting that somebody is committing fraud. I can't say for certain, but I'm probably 99.9% sure that fraud has not been committed, but I can't say until the audit is complete.
And it
But,
sounds like policies are being looked into to see if we can
yes,
find
but,
them a little bit.
you know, that is not what I was suggesting. I was
It didn't
asking.
sound like you said.
Okay, I just want to be very
No, it
clear
didn't
here.
sound at all like you were.
Okay, I just want to be very clear
And that's
here.
not what I was saying. So let me be very clear.
Okay.
Okay, any other conversation on 7A or B?
I have